with. It's bad enough as it is. There was once a world whose creatures were born with two sets of eyes, and things were arranged such that one set was always glued to the everyday flow of events natural to the place. As far as anyone could tell, the other set had no purpose. A boy and his father once sat on a hill overlooking a city, and the lad asked, "Who there in the place has a truer picture of what it is about? The simple and little thinking, or the more sophisticated and reflective?" And the older glanced skyward, then at the boy, and replied, "You keep that up and you're going to find life there less and less tolerable." Which, as it turned out to be, was what they both hoped for even before being able to give words to the desire. You might feel confident that the train is moving when you can no longer be pacified by the reading material available, nor sufficiently distracted through conversation with others. A man with an awareness past a certain station can only be entertained by one thing. And entertained, the word entertained but hints at what's then involved. In a faraway world was once some creatures who were each born with a watch, but a curious one in that it never told the present time. It could do so, but only if made to by its owner. As they were growing up inside a young boy, a stomach and a brain would sometimes chat and note to one another the view of life from their particular position. And not long into the teen years of their host, both organs sensed a constriction of the horizon, along with the appearance of what seemed to be a choice of but two available paths. At first blush, they both recoiled from this lessening of possibilities. But quickly, the stomach understood the propriety of the situation, and not too long after that did the brain likewise come around. To accept that which is natural and initially inevitable as the final word on what is possible is to cut oneself off from a more direct and individual connection with life's own limitless future. Thoughts telling how they've helped is like a crowd of spectators at a fire explaining to all who will listen how they were responsible for putting it out. The epic that is man and his eternal quest, one guy's poetic presentation. You can look at the sky, you can look at the ground, you can measure things square, you can measure things round. You can listen to waves, you can listen to men. But when you get to be 80 or so, it's about all over. Thanks, guy. News of neural topography, a supreme yet unnoted example of no way out is men trapped in thought who do not realize they are trapped in thought. In fact, the term no way out just barely suggests the nature of the situation. Health news. There is no cure for a man in a locked room. More of how life works its wondrous magic right before and in conjunction with men's eyes. Something becomes holy if enough people pretend that it is. A viewer writes, "From things you said on your most recent program, I asked myself the question, if the life of a lion would not be improved by its being given the ability to think, then in what way would a man's be harmed were it taken from him? And at any given instant moment, if I understood you correctly. This area seems deserving of much further study, which I plan to give it sincerely, etc." A man once so mused, if life is like a great vivus machina, a living machine, then those striving for individual consciousness are like men attempting to stick their finger into the machinery without losing their finger. Tricky to do, even tricky to talk about. When a suitable passenger has actively been on the train long enough to have fully read and consumed all of the newspapers thereon, he then realizes that all news, not from extraordinary sources, is always bad news. Thoughts and the common observations of collective man. The bystanders at all events always arrive after the event has occurred, and thus their reports thereof are perforce always incomplete and inaccurate, and this being the inevitable case, are always less than inspiring. Intelligence and the more basic matters, the conversation. You sure are stupid to have slept with him. Stupidity has nothing to do with sex. And thus the apparent struggle continues, misnamed, ill-defined, and never seen for what it is. There was once a man who wanted to get a tattoo that read, "Johnny come lately," but in a place inaccessible to the artist's pen. Some of you probably care to think less about that than others. Through the process of I, did one man's sight become rigid and fixed. The older one becomes, the more do they tend to operate on autopilot. And at, it might be noted, additional physical peril to themselves. One way that the mind handles fear is to pretend that it is sacred. A would-be magician came to the king, seeking a position via his claim of being able to talk to the dead, which his grace dismissed as useless by pointing to his own head. If you take the accusations, the condemnations, the hero worship, and solemnity from mysticism, most people lose whatever interest they imagined they had therein. A fact which itself should rattle the foundations of their attention, which as usual it does not. It is difficult to track and capture an exotic beast when you don't even know what its tail end looks like. In one galaxy was a planet whose inhabitants were always on vacation. Well, I say always, which is not literally true, but they were out of town and away from home more often than they weren't. Legend says there was once a most strange race of creatures, among whom those least articulate or sensible were those taken to be mystics. The passing of time can correct any mistaken belief, except when the belief was not actually mistaken, which is in most instances. Myth tells of a forgotten people whose dictionary listed as a synonym for proper the word operational. And might I add, such people are forgotten in advance. Even amidst the complexities of modern day, if you don't have to constantly think about what you're doing, what does that say about thought? There was once a man who had in his head, instead of a brain, a whirlpool, which he forever stared and stared into. The ordinary want to believe that there is more to life than there actually is to try and make it more tolerable. Routine cynics who say that there's less are simply stupid. Some carpentry news. Only those who can measure don't. Religion came from the second generation of man who, when born, found that all the thrones were already taken. Wolves who let the charisma of fangs cloud their thinking do not deserve to be called wolves who can think. A man undertook a strenuous journey to visit a certain mystic who lived far away in a barely accessible location. And once there, asked him this question: "Is there anything about man that has not yet been said?" And the mystic replied, "You came all this way just to ask me that." And another viewer writes, "From your last show, I picked up something you said that I really liked. Thought is given contemporaneous credit for its after-the-fact activities." I liked it, that is, until I thought about it. Partially, gratefully yours. One way in which the mind attempts to manage ignorance is by calling it sacred. Though undiscovered, there is a great cosmic clock forever ticking, inaudible, yet felt by all who think. One man reflected, "Once upon a time, life didn't seem to suck as much as it does now. But I do not know whether the once upon a time is in life or in me. Where is history?" And a man once pondered, "If the noises of my stomach could be turned into words like those of my brain, what would we have then, I wonder? That much different than we have now." So-called sacred objects can maintain their consecration only by being stared at. From inside the closed dark space, a voice was heard, "It sure is stuffy in here." To which a second responded, "It's no wonder. Just look what time it is." A conversational observation of potential value to but a few in that place. The intelligence of collective man is like a gigantic field of flowers. Some are taller than others, but all of them are stuck in the ground. One man so pondered, "Since it is obvious that life never provides any creature with any ability that is superfluous, methinks that a reconsideration of the mind's purpose might be in order." One way to tell that a person is incurably ill is if you can mention that they appear ill and they agree. Those whose thinking seems to them primarily verbal-based can live in seclusion and still fulfill their yakking needs. Talk is not the only form of talk. In an expanded reality wherein common perceptions of direction become meaningless, one can never be down, and thus never be kicked while down. Such a new reality is the only one proper to a real man's mind. Insofar as what could be seen as worthy of respect and what not, a man with a comment is a spitter in a cemetery. A man who never learns to see beyond thought can never be satisfied with what he sees. The extent of tolerance as pertains to awareness. Who would keep pets if they could vocalize their pains? According to an extremely ancient legend, one in fact never told since it was first thought of, the end of creation will come when Buddha bumps his head and misplaces his car keys for the 200th time. A man once asked, "What's that ticking I hear in my head, in my mind?" only to discover that it was his mind. If you can still be made to feel guilty, then you still don't know what causes guilt. All problems are the same. With the non-thinking creatures, it is just about how to stay physically alive. And with the thinking ones, how to stay physically and mentally so. At least it should be, wouldn't you think? One man had a thing that meant a great deal to him, which he kept in a box. He kept it there too long. One man's view: if you can just keep thinking and talking like you do now for 80 years or so, none of it makes any difference anyway. Jeez. The matter of time and the freedom to roam. None of the ships leave the dock, save the few off the clock. You can be smart in a crowd, but conscious only alone. Definition from the field of transcendental penology. The enlightened. Men who life periodically allows out on parole. Even in areas outside the South, it's not necessary for local conditions to remind men, y'all come back now. Simply put, a man more aware is one who correctly knows what he wants freedom from. Any idea someone has on their own, no matter where they believe they got it, no matter if they believe that they conjured it up themselves, amounts to nothing. No amount of effort, no matter of thinking about it, no matter of reading about some change in one's internal conditions, has any promise until you can separate yourself from life. It's damn near always something this simple and straightforward. Once it reaches the public agora, it takes on literal trappings, and hence you have the historically acceptable way for people to strive for greater consciousness by physically reclusing themselves. But that's not what's involved. It's irrelevant once you understand it. But what you've got to be able to do is internally separate yourself from life, which is absolutely required for a person to be able to ever distinguish themselves, whatever that might turn out to be, but to distinguish themselves from life's main local man, thought. If you cannot feel some separation from life, not imaginary, not some passing whim, but if you cannot feel, if there was such a thing, I'm fixing to make up a term, to the core of your essence. That kind of shit sounds good. If you cannot somewhere feel, as opposed to just hearing an idea or hear me say the words and go, oh yeah, I like that. Until you can feel that until you can feel yourself separate from life, which I announce in advance is unnatural, damn near impossible, and has no describable value. So let's dispense with that already. At least you people watching think you're wasting your time. If this has completely turned you off, go ahead and send in your 4 payments of $29.95, and I'll send you the goddamn juicer, all right? I will not be so rude as to include the suggestion as to on what part of yourself you might use it. Because it's obvious that you're not up to anything beneficial anyway, and so you'd probably on your own pick out the wrong function, if not organ or part. And also let me point out what should be obvious. when I say to separate yourself from life, we are speaking above the level of consciousness. We are speaking above the biosurvival level of man's existence and nervous system. To separate yourself from life does not mean to go without food, to go without sex, to turn your back on your family, to turn your back on responsibilities. It does not mean in any way, it does not even touch upon the biosurvival, the physical, the sane, necessary physical connections that everyone has with life. Only an idiot, only someone non-routine attempts such as that. Although we all know that under the guise of the search for consciousness and awakening and enlightenment, people do just that, torturing the body, which, I mean, it's a pretty cheap hobby, so, but it's doing nothing. The separation from life is strictly above the conscious level activity. And what the easiest ways to describe it, I guess, is that you can feel. It's not just something you can instantly do, but if you have followed all of this or your own path somewhere and you're wired up, if you were born to travel, then it makes some sense anyway. Without all my caveats and asides and sidebars and hey, look at here. Okay, we look there and now back to it. If you do not, the kind of separation that I said, the difference that you have got to feel yourself separate from life, is that you can no longer be driven as one group of creatures. It was pointed out on one planet we're born that one set of their eyes at least, that was a group that was born with two eyes if I remember correctly, which I do since I wrote it, and one of their sets of eyes was completely glued to the everyday, see this is everyday, flow, that's flow, of events natural to that world. In the same way, an ordinary person, even on this planet, an ordinary, sane, routinely wired person, just your average person, feels glued to life. Until you can feel that you are separate from the very things that apparently, to the ordinary, sane, sophisticated, educated people, in fact, the more sane or the more educated, sophisticated, the further they are in the front of the mechanical parade of evolution, the more they take the events of the world to be serious. This is not particularly proof of anything, but this sort of thing can be of use in an individual's inquiry, which I point out in several ways, but here again, right quick. In our day and time, right here in southern Norway, what most of us recognize is the contemporary cradle, the avant-garde of civilization. Our more simple Norwegian friends, the more simple they are, the less sophisticated, the less educated, none of it's the cause, but just the more simple among us, they feel the least glued to external events. That if we go down to the local fisherman's bar and start talking about the next prime minister, the election, the newest upcoming elections for Parliament, and who is standing and who the victorious party may elect as our new prime minister, we'll be hard-pressed to find anyone down there who knows any of the names involved or who will show much interest. The more, still at the ordinary level, but the more you get into the area of those that, relatively speaking, are educated and sophisticated, the more do they feel, the more do they say that world events are of extreme importance, and the more are they glued to them. Back to the main road. Until you can feel that you are separate from what's going on in the world, there's no chance of anything. You can dream, you can ride a train, you can ride a bus, you can imagine you're on a plane, you can imagine you're on a great mystical quest, you can imagine any day now you're going to get your armor and your visor glued down for good. That the Grail is just around the corner and you're just whistling outside of Camelot. As long as the events of the world, the natural events of the world, and I repeat now, only a few people ever can realize this, not because of stupidity or anything, it's just very few people can ever realize this, that the events of the world, as important as they seem, and from any ordinary view, from any sane person's view, from the normal operations of the ordinary sane mind, what I'm about to say is insane. And I understand that. I can take their view. I can uphold it. I can support it. That they can simply point out that the whole idea that the events going on out there are of no consequence to an individual. It is just on its face absolutely insane. Worse than that, it's blatantly incorrect. And anybody can prove it. All you got to do is start talking about, well, all right, what if the socialists get in instead of the Christian Democrats? What if they raise the taxes? What if you start paying more taxes? Don't tell me it's not going to have any effect on you. I know. Or what if they not only bring back the death penalty, what if they make it a felony to be as ugly as you are? You think, oh, you're right. The events of the world can, as they like to say here in Finland, impact one severely. They say that, it's hard to tell, but they say that nonetheless. As long as you sense, let me repeat again, no one thinks about it in this way. For me to say, unless you can feel yourself separate from the events of the world, you have no chance. It is not that everyone sits around, or that anyone sits around thinking the events of the world are just almost synonymous with me, or the events of the world are so intertwined with my sense of me that we're inseparable. No one thinks that way. But to bring it to a pimple head, if you must, verbally, is just what I said. If you just stated unconditionally to a group of ordinary people that the events, the normal events of the world, whatever they are, the normal events as you people experience. If I had a crowd of just ordinary, sophisticated, middle-class people, the events of the world and you are just two different things. Or if I really had to get their attention, if I said the events of the world have no effect on you, they just walk out. It is just absolutely insane. It is not true. It is not correct. I am not correct and them wrong. But as long as that is a sensation, a belief over which you cannot come, then you're never going anywhere. That is, amongst other possible descriptions I could give, that is a fair operational description of people's condition. Not physically. Remember that one more time. Because physically, no sane person frets over how much freedom they have or how much control the world has over them or how much control events have. If they're just ordinary and sane. Their wiring system is just sane, whatever sane and ordinary is. Not by my definition, but the majority of the time and place. Then a person does not fret, a person does not question, nor should they. A person has no interest, or they have no question, as to whether the events of the world have a direct relationship to them physically. Because obviously it does. For instance, if you can't find food, you will experience what is commonly known, I think, here in Italy as death. So you've got to find food. Everyone understands that. But once you move above the physical level and you tell someone subtly or even directly that, here it comes again, now, I don't want to frighten you, but it's the everyday flow of natural events. I know we have children and small animals in the audience at times. In fact, one woman brought in something in her arms that was hard for me to distinguish exactly which it was, but I didn't want to be insulting. I started asking what he was laughing at. Faking being humorous, though, takes a toll here on the time and what little wit some of us have left. So, if you recall, what I started out saying was that until you can separate yourself from the everyday flow of events natural to this world, to reality as you know it, to this planet, to the human condition, until you can separate yourself, non-physically, until you can separate yourself, nothing is possible. And until you can separate yourself, nothing is possible, nor can you reach a slightly expanded position of then, past that point, of being able to distinguish, I'm just going to say yourself for the moment. God knows what it will be. But to distinguish something in you apart from thought, which is life's, the events of life's, shill It's this door-to-door salesman. It's nailed through your foot mentally. It is life's direct connection to man at the non-physical level. It's thought. So in other words, if men are all slaves out on a plantation for life, then the straw boss, the guy named Bubba or Buford with a shotgun and a real nasty attitude, the one riding around that everyone dreads to see even come near you, that's thought. And thought works. Humans do not believe it. Ordinary people, again, they're not supposed to believe it, and it's not capable of being believed or not believed, but they will deny it. Because each person thinks, each person accepts if there's anything personal and private to them. Nowadays, as strong and as all-invasive as the bureaucracy is here in Turkestan, many of us feel, or many of you feel, that nothing is any longer private or sacred, that people know your social security number, whether you wear boxers or briefs. But if a man is pushed, each sane person believes that there is one thing still personal and individual to me, it's my thoughts. The damn local police may be able to force me to stay inside during certain hours, can force me or forbid me from doing certain activities. They can prohibit me making obscene gestures at the Prime Minister, but they cannot police my thoughts. Because when the Prime Minister goes by, if they're watching, I may bow and smile, and internally I may be saying, "Screw you, you old sod," and they can't do anything about it. And to an ordinary man, there is proof. My thoughts are the last, if not only, refuge of my true private individuality. You stupid sot. But I'm just being silly, of course, because you can't tell somebody that. If anybody was an ordinary person and had listened to this tonight, even this far, that would be the clincher. To tell somebody that your thoughts are not your thoughts. What can you do? A person can be as sincere as they want to and look and say, "Well, whose are they?" I say, "Well, they're not yours." And if they're actually trying, and they go, "Well, if they're not mine, then are they yours?" "No, they're not mine." "Well, are they his?" "No." What are you going to do with it? What would a mirror see if in front of it you held up a mirror? But back to the initial question, or problem, according to how you care to see it. If you cannot separate yourself from the natural flow of the events of life, the natural events, which include everything from you becoming married, falling in love, having children, having your wife or mother or loved one die, it's possible. They will eventually die if you don't die first. You landing a good job, you graduating from school, you flunking out of school, you losing a business after working like a dog for it. Or then you build it back up and it succeeds and you buy a big fine house to put your remaining children and wife in, and you're only there 2 days and a hurricane comes through and blows it down before you had a chance to buy insurance. But the next day you hit the state lottery for $40 billion. That's the natural flow of events. Well, it's only ordinary people. Only ordinary people with little pinhead minds, which is the ordinary state of awareness. I'm sorry. The ordinary state of awareness that always must localize. That is the fragmented operation of what is people normally call their consciousness, which is just simply the passing parade of thoughts. But they are absolutely fragmented. And they work in isolation. That is what staring represents. Oh, I see. Oh, okay. People will say that some of the events they should take more personally and some not. A normally educated, sophisticated man, again, will perhaps at times attempt to wax philosophically. And if you say, well, the normal events of life, I heard them described just tonight as being good times, bad times, mediocre times, good times, and a man can go, assuming he's at least in the midst of mediocre times, not bad times. An ordinary man can go. I'm going to have to do another, or I'm going to help make the point. Attempt to wax philosophically. And he can go, that's true, that's true. Whoever said that is certainly insightful, because many times I've said the same thing. That, life's a bunch of ups and a few downs. Life's roses and life's a few thorns. But you do know, we're not making fun of anybody or criticizing, here's the way the mind works. As long as you take life seriously, as I generally call it, which tonight I'm trying to get you to see is to take life seriously, is to not be able, not even attempt, but not be able to separate yourself from the normal flow, the natural flow of events. As long as you cannot do that, you can any attempt to wax philosophically. And they say, well, you're right. When it rains on the just and the unholy alike. An ordinary man will only say that when it's not raining on him. An ordinary man will only say, yes, life is roses sometimes and thorns sometimes. An ordinary mind will only say that when it's non-thorn time for that mind. What it would take to see otherwise would be able to separate from life, to separate yourself from life, to be able to distinguish yourself from life. Else not, you're always glued to it. And it doesn't matter whether you say, well, I'm glued to it in a fine way today. Okay. I don't care. Yes, but yesterday I was glued to it in a horrible way, but I don't know, I snapped myself out of it. A few good martinis and took a look at myself in the mirror and I said, brace up, old chum. Who are you? You're a man among men. You're a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, by God. And I went, he is now out of the thorn stage. The point being, there is no way that the ordinary mind can take anything resembling an objective, impartial, and all of this, all it infers is a non-personal view of what's going on in life. And until you can separate yourself from it, until you've got a feeling, I'm almost beating not a dead horse, I'm beating a dead illusionary horse. Because by now either you've got it or you don't, but here, you got to fill up 20 more minutes. There is no way to prove, nor would I try, and it's not provable, because from the majority view, from the ordinary view, what I'm saying is incorrect. It's insane. But the events of life, the natural events of life, for a few people, can be experienced, not just theoretically, not just momentarily, although it is a process of a bunch of momentarities put together, you might say. But that the events out there, in truth, there's no way to describe it, and those of you who know it, you know damn well what I'm saying, you could not describe it, nor would you feign to try and describe it. Or if you ever feigned to, you only did it once. You turned around to somebody that you thought was super intelligent, one of your old philosophical drinking coffee buddies from college, or your mother or your father, somebody go, you know what I've realized? What goes on in life doesn't really have any effect on me. Yeah. And you insist that you mean that literally? You only tried it once, and you found out your best intellectual compadre looked at you like you were a 3-day-old chicken taco. They understood, they recognized the metaphorical possibility of ptomaine poison, and they are not about to swallow that. They're not even going to chew on it. At any rate, back to where we were. You understand the reason I keep doing this is not to kill 20 minutes. You understand from one view, I keep saying, and I'm sure all of you that are paying attention can do it by now, you do understand for me to say, or anyone to say, the idea that one more time, the everyday flow of natural events in the world have no individual, have no personal effect on you. I could put it in a more genteel way, but that's good enough to cover it for now. You do understand. You cannot tell that to an average person. You cannot, that will not, as you might say, compute in your ordinary mind. It simply will not. Not because you're stupid, it simply will not. The best that will happen is holding a mirror in front of a mirror and say, what do you see? And it's like the mirror goes into insulin shock. In other words, it just goes, and you don't see anything. You can say, well, something's going on. If a mirror's in front of a mirror, by God, something's going on. It can see itself. Okay, mirror, what do you see? That's asking the mind, that's asking ordinary thought to comprehend what I'm saying right now. To tell remember, we're not talking about the body. The body wouldn't even hear this, and if it could hear it, the body would properly dismiss it. If the body did have something resembling intellectual consciousness, and we could speak to the body, not to the body, the events of the world, you can separate yourself. They have no real connection to you. The body then would quite properly turn to me and go, because it would literally, not just from its view, it would literally be correct in saying it's untrue. But back to the mind and thoughts, to try and tell the thought, anyone's thought, their process, mental process, is to tell them that the events of the world and you are two separate things. That to do it the hard way in the beginning, to brace up their little face, is to say the events of the natural flow of events of everyday life have nothing to do with you. The best it can do, even if it tries to consider it, is like a mirror in front of a mirror. It just, there's nowhere to go. So, it is not something that can be proven. It is not something that is a workable theory. It's named something that's an interesting theory. That's why you don't ever hear of it. People don't go around talking about this or going, well, I heard an interesting theory. They may try it once, as I said, as a theory on somebody, and their friends will say, who the hell you been hanging around? That's not a theory. That's irrational doggle. There is, might I suggest, go ahead and jump into something a little more dogmatic, arf arf. Might I suggest, might I suggest, that still sounds better, that enlightenment, liberation of the mind, awakening of consciousness, all of that, the very first, the absolute floor demanded, the minimal change in one for this to occur is to understand personally, is to have the awareness. Again, none of this can be described. I understand that adequately. Because it's insane. It's not true verbally. The world of the mind, the world of language, this is not true. So remember that again. We all know that. But you can understand the basic awareness is that, and we're just talking about a few people wired up to do it. Can't be converted to it. You're either wired up to do it and can do it, or you can't. You can even hear about it or you can't. The world of events out there, you can intellectually, you can separate yourself, not just in some arbitrary fashion and not in just some form of self-hypnosis like, well, I don't care what goes on, I don't care what goes on, I don't care what goes on. I mean, people have been trying that also out in the public marketplace for years and years. Of people stumbling across ideas such as this, or they just stumble on their own, the idea of, again, sort of the, even though they misname it somewhat, but the Western idea of a stoic warrior, of someone who finally understands, and they usually still leave it, as always, at just a physical level, that a true warrior, someone like a mystical knight, someone out on the quest for the metaphorical grail, someone truly out of the ordinary, were they wounded, did a dragon breathe fire on one foot and singe the little hairs off their shins, or did an arrow pierce their armor, a true warrior would not stand and whine about it. He would in some way have developed the ability to shut off pain. That's the old idea, again, of people trying to torture their body, go without food, or sit out in a thunderstorm, and in some way if they actually get hit, they will either become enlightened like Buddha or fried like Benjamin Franklin. But the idea in some way, that by torturing the body, by physically abusing the body, I will increase my consciousness. That is just a childish interpretation of what I'm saying. That is, of people not just saying or believing that the goal is to make myself immune from pain. That you can almost use that. And I will admit there have been probably a handful of so-called mystical schools that part of their outer shell was they use such methods just for a moment. But you should say, if a man runs in, if Buddha does bump his head again, then at least Buddha, you could say that you would expect of a Buddha or Mohammed or some mystical hero, that at least if he was talking to somebody and turned around and ran into a door, busted his head and a little blood, that at least you would expect he's not going to whine and go, oh God, do all that, oh, and you'd expect that. But see, here's the thing. Even though that is not improper to say that a would-be mystic truly should not whine when he bumps his head, but the indifference to pain is not what is really being sought. It's indifference to thought, because it was thought that distracted Buddha and made him run into the goddamn door anyway. Doesn't anybody understand that? His body didn't do it. You've never stumped your toe because your body wasn't looking where it's going. You never misplaced your keys, your car keys, for the 2200th time. Where are my keys? I'm in a hurry. You do not bump your head. You do not bump your head under the auspices, under the misformed, the ill direction of the body. That is not what makes a man bump his head. It's thought. And I assume you do know, not the particular thought. It doesn't matter what thought. But an ordinary sane, every day, don't forget Buddha, an ordinary person does not walk into a door and bump their head due to the body. That was not the operation of the body. That was due to the mind. So, back to where I was, way off the closing point. But we'll get there. And if we don't, sue me. Don't shoot me with an arrow, that hurts. Sue me. Now wait a minute. Shoot me with an arrow. I was just trying to think which pain I would prefer, or most any reasonable person would prefer to suffer, being in the courtroom with a judge or extracting an arrow from a soft, fleshy part of one's body. And I think I'd choose the latter, as most any intelligent person would do. I hate the fake humor. What do you call an attorney with an IQ of 40? We won't go into that. It is not, back to where I was, the whole idea, right quick, I assume all of you know, of the idea of mystical nights, much of the Eastern version of the martial arts, are tinged, if not outright, covered with ideas that more is at foot, or could be afoot, than simple physical exertion or the defense of one's body, that it is in some way an inner journey. That is, that one is not attempting to become like the samurai, the classical samurai, who is physically immune to pain. As all of you know, in fact, a samurai, a real one, would be so good that had he executed some prohibited offense, offended his lord, offended the code of the samurai, that without any hesitation, he simply, it's known as carving a meatloaf on oneself, is a hara-kiri, that they simply killed themselves. No, they just didn't stick it, didn't shoot themselves. They stuck it out and then pulled it up and ripped out your intestines and let them fall while you bled to death. Now that's a samurai, except what is it really representing? Beyond any of you people, beyond any of you teenage boys, which there are plenty of middle-aged women who are still teenage boys that find that kind of crap fascinating. Slasher movies, almost any kind of drama that somebody is being, anyway, I know that has attraction, but surely if you got any, I'm assuming I'm talking to a better class of people, I assume that you have some suspicion that somewhere along the line it had more to do than just an indifference to physical pain. That a true warrior, you've got to give it some symbolic, go beyond metaphorical, go to symbolic significance. That in the East, the West, throughout the annals of all recorded history on this planet have been the ideas of samurai warriors who are proven to be indifferent to physical pain. But come on, you know if it's an inner quest, the indifference to physical discomfort is not the point. It is indifference to another kind of internal discomfort. Not external, but internal discomfort. And what they are striving for is an indifference once they understand that life out there and something in me can be separated. And of course, the true warrior finds out very shortly. He tries to find out how to do it, or he talks to other people about it, and everybody goes, what? So the point again being, you're either born to the samurai class. You're either born wanting to fly, you're either born wanting to travel, or you're not. But somewhere along the way, you hear such stories. And although they may grab your attention to start with, you have by now got to understand that what they're after, without knowing it, but the origins of all that was an indifference to life itself is first, and then it creates an indifference internally to the way you're connected to life. See, simple people, ordinary people, their main connection to life is what? Physical. And so if you ask an ordinary person, if you told them that you were a genie and you like the jib of their cut, and you're just, for general purposes, you're going to award them, nobody's done you a favor lately, so you just selected them sort of at random to give them a favor. Undeserved, but you ask them, which would you like? Would you like to have, I'll give you a choice. You can be either indifference to physical pain or indifferent to non-physical pain. you're not going to find anybody on this planet that's going to ask for additional time to think about it. Everyone, as they should, will say physical, because an ordinary person, a simple, ordinary, albeit perhaps educated and very sophisticated, powerful, rich, their primary connection to life is physical. All of ours radical connection is. But the extent of their interest in their connection to life scarce ever goes any further, any higher than the physical. I mean, they don't want to be educated. They get rich and famous. They don't want to be enlightened. The richer they get, they want to buy first editions of Buddha's writings. They don't want enlightenment. Or you understand, it's not, their appreciation does not become any greater non-physical just because they become wealthy. It just becomes that then they physically want to acquire what seems to be some connection. Like somebody who says they want to reach the state of enlightenment, and they get enough money, and they will pay large sums of money for what is purported to be a bone out of Buddha's little finger, or a piece of Jesus's thigh bone, because if I got, I can hold that, and if I hold it and sleep with it, or whatever the hell they imagine. All of this, I jumped too far, in a sense, into the more specified area, but ordinary people, as they should, feel, without thinking about it, they don't analyze it and they do not think about it, but they feel an absolute, there's no good word, you could stop and say symbiotic, and that doesn't cover it. Siamese twin doesn't cover it, because that still conveys, I must go back and quote myself. An ordinary man's consciousness, his feeling toward life, is that of like cellophane tape. That he is the adhesive, or the backing, it doesn't matter. That he's the adhesive, and life is the backing part. Because you've got to have both parts, and that is it. It's not the reason I was searching around, even though somewhat dramatically, about symbiotic all the way to cellophane tape. They're literally, those of you who can see it, there is no description for this. It is not just that ordinary people, again, non-verbally, non-mentally, nobody thinks about it, and so the fact that there is no word for it has never arisen. No one's ever noticed it because no one is aware of it. But this connection, the closest word is people feel synonymous with life. And if you told them that, they'll deny that, because that really doesn't make any sense. Rhetorically, grammatically, I can't defend that. Somebody can say, well, I'm not synonymous with life. You must mean something else. And I say, well, yeah. And they go, what? And I go, well, that's the best I can do. They go, well, see you around. Because there simply is no description. But it's what I was getting at to say that you have no chance of ever moving until you can feel yourself separate from life, non-physically. But to describe what it is, the closest that I know in English is synonymous. But as I already pointed out, that will not fly with people. I cannot defend it. If I told somebody, if I went through all of this, somebody and they said, well, what are you actually trying to get at tonight? And I said, well, it's to point out to you that non-physically, people's consciousness, people's awareness of their own existence, people's awareness of life and everything that, see, this is everything, that everything, that they must be able to separate from that. And they go, I don't get it. What do you mean? What is it that they're trying to separate? Now, so it's this non-physical, it's this feeling they have of being non-physically. They go, well, out with it. And I go, well, people, without thinking about it, feel as though they're synonymous with life. And if I got it out and they went, that's it. I waited 2 or 3 minutes for you to come out with that. And I go, that's the best I can do. They go, well, I'll give you a couple more seconds. Can you explain that any better? And I go, no. They go, thank you, good night. See you around. Because it will not work. But there is no better one. Because people never think about it. And if you try to bring it up to the mind, and it says, all right, wait a minute. You're saying that I have some kind of potentially non-beneficial, non-physical attraction or connection to life. And I go, yes, yes, yes. And they go, well, in what way? I mean, describe it. If you start trying to describe it, they've never thought about it. No one ever thinks about it. It's not worthy of thought. It's not proper to think about. And for one reason, of course, I'm just not getting to tonight, is because the connection that life has mainly to you is through thought. That is its right-hand henchman. That is the straw boss. And so, since people never think about it, if you bring it up in such a way or cause them to momentarily think about it, there is nothing to think about. There is no way to describe it, because it is an unthinkable situation, thought itself. We're back to, for those of you that like it at all, it's not all explanatory, but it's holding a mirror in front of a mirror. People never think about the non-physical, absolute captivity to life, the enslavement to life. And it's through thought, but they never think about it. And so if you bring up the thing, just hint about it allegorically, that men are in some way absolutely captured. They're imprisoned by the flow of events in life. And the person goes, huh, oh, all right, go ahead, I'll listen for a second. It sounds like it's the beginning of some myth or some fable or something. Well, what do you mean? Because they know that you mean something other than literal. That you're not speaking literally, that you mean it metaphorically or even symbolically. And they go, well, all right, what? And you go, well, there's no what, it's just you really are. Your non-physical sense of yourself and life is inseparably tied to everything that goes on in life. The natural, everyday flow of events, the ups and downs, the hurricanes, the spells, the famines, the feast, everything. And for the first time, they think about it. Or the first time they've ever done it purposefully, that they go, all right, and they think about it for the first time, purposefully. And there's nothing to think about. And they go, well, wait a minute. No, wait, now, I assume you mean something. Well, specifically, what do you mean? Try one more allegory. It's as though you dropped your 11-foot cotton sack, and you jumped up from the weeds, and you grabbed Bubba up on that horse, and you grabbed the son of a bitch, and you say, you can't do this to me. Do I have to finish it? Bubba cannot recognize himself. The best he'll say is, who are you talking to? And you go, you. They go, who? You sorry son of a bitch. Who? Very few people ever try to jump up and grab Bubba. Well, I gave you a choice. Is the mirror looking in a mirror? Or are you trying to grab Buford off the horse? At least trying to make Buford, at least shouting into his face, denying, denouncing his nefarious hold over you. He goes, who? To tell the mind that it is, in general, unprofitably connected to life and controlled by the natural, everyday flow of events, the mind simply goes blank. Only a few people can hear that, and that's just the beginning. And of course, we're out of time tonight. But you have, well, only a few people. That ought to be enough to, if anybody was just hearing this for the first few times, that ought to be enough to hold you over the weekend, though. Is that you can, and properly so, a few people, you can feel yourself separate, non-physically separate from the, you want another direction? From the everyday flow of events natural to this universe. Can't get out of them. You can't physically unplug yourself. But you can feel yourself separate from it. Which that alone, that's not the way it works, but that alone changes the whole game.